Do couples who smoke more fight less? And does it depend on if you both partake? So today I'm going to explain the relationship between weed and relationships. So there's a surprising amount of information out there about this. And I say that considering we have like nothing on ADHD and hormones, but for some reason we have a ton on weed and romance. Kind of side-eyeing you, science. So first, we see that weed might actually improve intimacy. I'm not just talking about sex here. I'm talking about specifically like emotional communication, emotional support, things of that sort. So there's a study that basically just had both people in a couple report in about when they used weed. And then they also had them report into the question of, did you have an interaction or meaningful conversation with your partner that involved intimacy, love, caring, or support? And if both partners had used weed before that, they reported that they were more likely to have those sorts of conversations or interactions. And this was true even if only one of the people had reported that they had used. Now, weed has also been linked to having just kind of positive feelings in general and more positive communication, but it's also had a dark side. So in other studies, it's linked to kind of an avoidance of conflict. So people don't want to actually confront problems if they're stoned, which fully fits what I know about stoners. Like, the only arguments that are actually worthy when you're high are things like, how deep does a pan need to be to become a pot? And other studies have found that increased weed use is associated with higher divorce rates. So if somebody is more likely to use that drug, they are also more likely to be divorced later on. So we see some positive effects and we see some potentially negative effects. But we also see that it really matters if one person uses and the other person doesn't. If both people use, it seems to lead more to positive outcomes, but if only one of the people in a couple use, it seems to be linked to worse outcomes. This seems particularly true if the female uses more. Now, using in general seems to matter, but does it actually matter how much you use as well? Now, a recent study tried to answer this by basically inviting 110 couples, all over the age of 18, all straight, shocking, and all of whom had been in a relationship for more than 6 months. They invited them to just kind of answer questions about each other, but then also to just have an interaction on videotape. So they basically asked them, like, how much do you commonly smoke? All sorts of questions about their weed use. And then they also ask questions about their relationship. So do you feel respected by your partner? Do you feel like your partner understands you? And here's what they found. So if one person used a lot more weed than the other, they were less likely to be satisfied with their relationship. But women who used a lot were much more satisfied in their relationships, whereas men who used a lot were much less satisfied in their relationships. Why? One of the leading theories is that men just commonly use a lot more and have a lot more of those worse outcomes because of it. Whereas women use less frequently and are less likely to have those really negative problems associated with commonly using huge amounts of weed. And then the authors were like, well, maybe it could be gender roles too. So women who are stoners are just kind of non-traditional, they're non-conformist, and that can make them actually have a better overall quality of life, which is a theory. If you got thoughts on that one, let me know. I'm curious to hear if this matches or doesn't match your experiences as well. But then, of course, at the end of the article, they tied it to something that could be very problematic, which is if women are finding more satisfaction in their romantic relationships from weed, they are then more likely to just continue to smoke weed, and then they might get pregnant while they smoke weed, and that might have problems. Like, that is a black diamond of a slippery slope, y'all. So is weed good or bad for relationships? Shockingly, as a professor, I'm going to say it depends. If one person uses a lot and then the other person does not use that much, that's actually problematic for relationships. And it's true that, like, if one person is addicted to something, that's not great for a relationship either. Literally, one of the criteria for addiction is that it is interrupting your social and romantic relationships. And it might make you fight less, but in the long term, that might not actually be good for your relationships either. But one study referred to it as like spending your leisure time together. Like, you have a hobby. You both partake in this drug. And that doesn't seem to be actually that problematic for your relationship. So is weed going to make you fight less with your significant other? Maybe. Is that a bad thing? Also maybe. But it probably actually has very little impact on your relationship with your forever nightstand.